Today in court, the United States dealt yet another blow to Julian Assange, the Australian journalist and founder of WikiLeaks. This morning, a preliminary hearing took place in London at the Royal Courts of Justice. My name is Richard Medhurst. I covered Assange's extradition hearing in London, and I attended the High Court hearing remotely this morning. Basically, the United States went into court seeking permission to appeal on all 5 grounds. If you recall, in January, Assange's extradition to the US was blocked by District Court Judge Vanessa Baraitser. Now, the US didn't like this and immediately lodged an appeal, saying it would take this to the High Court. And now, although the judge agreed with all the political charges against Assange, she decided he should not be extradited to the US because of his health condition and the high risk of suicide were he to be sent there, where he would undoubtedly be placed in awful prison conditions. Now, the United States was given permission to appeal, but only on 3 out of 5 grounds. So today at the High Court, the US sought to convince the judges to let them appeal on all 5. So the judges ruled in their favor. Now, the first is that a lead psychiatrist and expert witness, Professor Koppelman, allegedly misled the court when he did a psychiatric evaluation of Assange. In his report, Professor Koppelman only mentioned that Julian Assange had a partner, who we now know is Stella Morris, the mother of his children. However, at the time, he didn't include Stella's name out of respect for their privacy and fear for their safety. After all, they have good reason to fear for their safety when Assange and his family have been threatened and spied on by US intelligence. So apparently, just because Professor Koppelman didn't say Stella's name in his report, the prosecution wants to discard all of his psychiatric findings, even though they're perfectly legitimate and were accepted by the judge. The prosecution also claims that Professor Koppelman relied heavily on Assange's self-reporting. Yes, so does every psychiatrist in the world. But they're acting here like Koppelman is an idiot or engaged in some shady practices when he's actually one of the world's leading neuropsychiatrists. So whether Stella's name was in his report or not does not change the fact that Julian Assange still suffers from mental illness. Numerous doctors substantiated this in court. And remember, one of the United States' own key witnesses against Assange, Sigurður Thordarson, admitted that he fabricated his entire witness testimony against Assange in exchange for immunity. But somehow, Professor Koppelman's entire psychiatric evaluation should be thrown out because he didn't mention Stella's name? And let me tell you something. When I saw Julian this morning in the court, it brings me absolutely no pleasure to say this, but he looked absolutely awful. He just turned 50, but looks well beyond his years. He looks old and frail, and you can see the toll that years of persecution have taken on him. It is so clear, it is so obvious that this man's physical and mental health have been wrecked by prolonged isolation and what is effectively torture. Is this how a civilized nation treats journalists? Now, in the second grounds of appeal, which were granted to the US, the prosecution claims that the district judge erred in her entire judgment of Assange's mental health. So they don't just mean Professor Koppelman. They're saying that the judge mistook all of the psychiatric evidence, which is the whole reason and the only reason she blocked Assange's extradition. So even though the prosecution's own doctors, like Blackwood and Fazell, agreed that Assange suffers from depression, the prosecution wants to put Assange's mental health on trial all over again, just because the judge preferred the evidence given by the defense's medical experts and not theirs. Numerous doctors testified, and they all said the same thing. Assange will die if he's taken to the United States. So the United States got what it wanted today, and it will be allowed to appeal on all 5 grounds in October. It is evident that appealing on just 3 out of 5 wasn't enough for them. They want all of them to ensure a slam dunk. This is how determined they are. The US is so adamant to extradite Assange, it will even discredit one of the world's top neuropsychiatrists and throw out all the medical and scientifically backed evidence on a technicality. With today's decision, the whole conversation has shifted to Assange's health and away from press freedoms. You see, we're no longer talking now about WikiLeaks and about the CIA kidnapping and torturing people or the US murdering civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now the US can just go to the High Court in October and say, well, you know, we don't think Assange has depression. We don't think there's a high risk of suicide. And they could potentially get away with that. And even if they don't, it's so important to understand that this case does not necessarily need to result in a conviction, because the entire process is the punishment.